Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. I'm very, very excited and appreciative to introduce you to Arianna Ciula. She's the Director and Senior Research Software Analyst at King's Digital Lab at King's College London. Arianna has over 15 years experience in collaborative digital humanities research and 10 years experience in research management and digital research infrastructures. She's an active member of the RSE in the UK and Digital Humanities national and international communities. She researches and advocates for a holistic understanding of digital infrastructures and of modeling processes of cultural historical objects and phenomena for the application of computational methods. Her personal research interests focus on modeling processes from data modeling to design and analysis. She lectured and published on humanities computing, in particular on digital manuscript studies and editing. She's organized conferences and workshops in digital humanities and is an active member of the international community. She's got a lot of other stuff around there as well, but I'm too excited. I want to jump into it. Arianna, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you very much, Roland, and I'm very, very sorry I couldn't take part in other parts of the conferences, and I also have to rush after this to actually meet some Australian colleagues face-to-face for a workshop, but hopefully I can speak a little bit about that project. So I did realize that I didn't really have a title for my keynote, so I'm going to say a few words about what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I want to say a little bit about myself and the role of RSCs in Arts and Humanities. So it was good to jump in when the discussion about roles was just taking place now. I'm going to say something obviously about the institutional context where I work, King's College London, a university in London, and specifically about King's Digital Lab, the team of research software engineering roles that I direct. Is mission and activities, a little bit about team structure and processes, and hopefully I'll touch on research themes and some example projects. And I will try to end to say why I think RSCs in Arts and Humanities are important. So about me, I'm Sardinia, so I come from an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, Italian, and therefore my identity is very much rooted in European culture. I started being involved in computational methods quite earlier on, already my high school, the program on classics and math and programming, believe it or not, in C+ at the time. But also during my BA, I think this is very important to mention for new people coming in, especially in disciplines that are maybe less technical. I did some student internships at the National Centre of Research in Pisa that already involved working with engineers, and in particular, training a neural network at the time for the recognition of fonts in old printed books. I did my BA, PhD, and a few project involvement as research assistant at the University of Siena, which is in Tuscany in Italy. And then at some point in my career, I moved to London, where I did a master in humanities computing, it was called at the time. Did several roles as project officers, been involved and exposed to different digital humanities projects in different roles. Then my career took me elsewhere, but I came back to King's, and then it's where I took the role of analyst, and then later on deputy director, and then since 2022, director of the lab. So I have I guess, a strong connection and sense of identity within the digital humanities community, which is quite wide and broad at the moment. I also have a little bit of experience in research management. I worked as a science officer and consultant for the European Science Foundation. We used to be an organization of research funders, representative of research funders organizations in Europe. So I used to take care of both contributing to drafting policy documents around research and research management, but also indeed designing instruments for funding research. And also worked as a research facilitator in another UK university. So I moved a little bit across the world, also closer to your part of the world. I lived in Singapore for a while, in France, UK, and so on. So what can I say about research software roles in the arts and humanities? Well, to start with, as I said, my perspective comes mainly as my role, based on my role within the lab, and more recently as director of the lab. And I should clarify that the research software engineering roles I'm most familiar with are within the arts and humanities, which is quite a big spectrum of disciplines, all the way from history, literature, art history, linguistics in some areas, literature and so on, but also cultural heritage more specifically. So the work with institutions that hold collections and want to make these collections more accessible, but also useful for studying and research in the arts and humanities. And the definition that we use of research software roles is quite inclusive. So again, going back to the discussion that was taking place just now, here you have a definition that our research funder, the Arts Humanities Research Council in the UK, takes as a definition of research technical professionals. And in both the additions that we in the lab, as part of the consultation that research funded, added in. So you'll see, for example, that in our discipline, at least, design is very important. The role of infrastructure roles are also very important. So system managers are mentioned. Other adjacent roles to the research software engineer roles, such as project and research infrastructure managers, are very important for these teams to operate. And maybe most important of all is the idea that for this role, we need to think holistically across the research cycle, from project and product conception all the way to archiving and the commissioning phases. So again, I hope that kind of addresses some of the questions that were discussed earlier. I should add that even if you like, the RSE turn in digital humanities is relatively recent, there has been quite a lot of discussion in the community. There is a new project started in 2023, led by the Alan Turing Institute, that is looking exactly at RSE roles and a roadmap to develop capability and careers. It's called data culture. There has been a panel at a European infrastructure event earlier this year on the RSE turn, representing different labs and different institutions. And maybe most important of all, there's also been a policy document led by now one of your colleagues in Australia, James Meaty, who used to be the founding director of King's Digital Lab. That was commissioned by the research funder to discuss indeed and propose recommendations for these roles and for really enabling high quality research using computational methods in the arts and humanities and cultural heritage. All the links are there, and I'm sure this will be shared if it hasn't been already. So what else can I say about the what it means really to do software intensive research in the arts and humanities? I don't really know how many of you are so in the Slack channel that some of you do work in this area, but maybe it's important to note, first of all, that empirical methods, but also the use of apparatus and infrastructure has always been present in arts and humanities research. So it's not something new. So it existed also before computational methods, and it's quite old. But maybe there is a bit of a perception that the role of digital methods in these disciplines is confined or restricted to presentational work mainly. So, and this is mainly due to the nature of some of the publication in arts and humanities research. So there's a lot of obviously development, design, production of public web environments, for example, edition of ancient texts, historical databases. And in King's Digital Lab, we still develop and maintain quite a lot of this material. I think I have here, yes, an example from one of our inscriptions projects, where there is a set of corpus of, you cannot see it very well, I'm sorry, the image is a bit low quality, but you have a set of Greek inscriptions. You can browse these inscriptions in different way, analyze the information in their entities, searching it, downloading the data set and so on. And we also have quite a pioneering historical databases, such as the prosopography of Anglo-Saxon England. This is a little bit more of a creative image, but there again is a web environment where you can, we have a very complex faceted search that allow it, and obviously a very complex backend data structure to allow you to allow a researcher to browse this material, to annotate a study and so on. But increasingly, we should say, there is also really data and software intensive research, partially due to the fact that obviously there are more data out there, more digitization has happened, there's more material, but indeed also because there is a shift in use of empirical methods also in these disciplines. Hopefully I'll be able to say something more about this specific project here, Living with Machines. We had a, if you like, a minor role in this project, but this is an example of the kind of notebooks that we produce to use some of the data in this project, analyze it, explore, apply machine learning methods, in this specific case, for the study of change of meanings around words related to transport during and after the Industrial Revolution. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of the space we work in. I also should add that within King's, there is quite a long tradition of engaging with computational methods in the arts and humanities, over 40 years of activity, believe it or not. And obviously things have evolved since then, but it started quite earlier on. So King's DH means DA, Digital Humanities at King's. There is a very big department of digital humanities. The head of the department now is Mark Hedges. And I'm sure these stats are already out of date, but it gives you a sense of the scale there. 7 master's degree, 2 undergraduates, PhD program, a lot of teaching staff, obviously with their own research portfolios and projects. And this is separate from, I should say, the lab where I work, right? There's also recently a kind of a college investment in enabling digital research across disciplines. There's a Digital Futures Institute, which is hosted by the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, interestingly enough, with the main theme of living well with technology and how different disciplines can support that. There is a College Institute on AI. And crucially, I think for this audience, that we now also have a central e-research provision that enables and facilitate computationally data-intensive research across the university. So obviously the lab where I work is very much aligned to the central provision, which obviously offers hardware, infrastructure, but also expertise, including RSE capability. So what about the lab then? The lab became operational in 2015 as part indeed of, if you like, building on all that work that went over into developing practical project and digital outputs for us humanities, to kind of build on indeed if you like, the development arm of the department, so separated from the teaching department. There's now 30 members of staff in the lab, including me. And I'm very pleased to say that now all of us have permanent contracts or open-ended contracts. You'll see that the roles there vary from, if you like, support roles all the way to research software engineering roles. I'll say a little bit more about that. And obviously, year on year, we might have affiliated researchers that work with us, with visiting fellows, including actually an Australian Cathbot who's been a visiting fellow for a while. We collaborate with researchers and research organizations of different kinds. We do co-lead research and research application. I think Roland was mentioning being part of big grants. We're part of big grants all the time, but we don't necessarily lead or co-lead those funding applications, but we definitely include it in there as technical partners providing research services. And if we have time, we can talk more about what that means. Therefore, we are supported by external funding, but as I said, our contracts are permanent, so we are underwritten internally with the understanding that we aim to bring in cost recovery via those grants. This is defined every year, and at the moment it's around 50%. The research areas as RSE that we try to boost, and in the last few years we try to define objectives around this beyond single projects, are these 5 that you see here. Hopefully I'll be able to say a little bit more about what they mean. And just to give you an idea again on scale, so last financial year, which ended in July, we did technical work for around 20 funded projects, plus work on over 50 what we call post projects, so projects that kind of ended their core funding period, but for which we had to do some work, either because we had additional funding to extend some functionality, or simply really to maintain what was already there. This is the team structure. Broadly, you'll see two kind of teams, a bigger software development team, which is composed of analysts like me, engineers, research software engineer, system manager, and 2 designers, UI UX designers. These are very important roles for us because indeed of the kind of work we do. But I do realize they're quite maybe more specific to our disciplines, and they've been taken on more recently also in STEM disciplines. And I think it's a very important role to make sure that whatever you produce really is enabled by robust user research, and the interfaces really are aiming to address specific research questions and are useful for specific research contexts. And then we have a lab support team composed mainly of the lab manager and project manager, but you see that obviously part of my time is also to support the rest of the team as director. And then we also have a deputy director, Paul, who has an analyst role, as well as a little bit of time for his deputy role. And our principal research software engineer also is part of that lab support function. And this is very important because if you like, management, strategy, implementation is informed very much by the values and the objectives of the solution development team via the principal research software engineer. I'm not going to say too much about the team roles. If you're interested, please do Slack me afterward, email me, and so on. But I want to say that even if in the team, each of us is quite diverse type of background, obviously the research software engineers, they do have a software engineering background and exposure and worked within the arts humanities for a long time. But I think it's important to highlight that the importance of creativity and openness to diverse research domains for this role, the ability to identify patterns of similarity across heterogeneous projects also play an important role. And I think these are really the things that are essential to the role of RSE, to look beyond specific niche questions and identify common methods. So what is our main mission? As a document that I drafted together with senior management when I joined as director, our primary role is to contribute to high quality grant funded projects with significant technical requirements. And again, going back to the discussion earlier, this means also contributing to grant application, including requirement solicitation. So we spend quite a lot of time in concept development, especially in areas where we have partners that might be less if you like, savvy in terms of digital literacy, but not only in those cases. So drafting a feasibility assessment and solution architecture is part of what we do. So when a project is funded, we identify the activities under these three clusters: so planning and analysis, creating and sustaining, participating, contributing, and disseminating. You find all these on our website, but it gives you a sense of the variety of activities that the expertise of the team is deployed to support. And you'll find more about the kind of projects we do again on our website. This is an image that explains a little bit our software development life cycle. It's obviously mapped to good practices in industry and other areas. I'm not going to say too much about it, except obviously the importance of iterations and how those are conducted within the team, managed collaboratively within sub-teams within the team that work on specific projects. So typically each project has 3 members: the analyst that acts as a sort of scrum master, if you like, the research software engineer, and usually the UI UX designer as well. We have also a document that describes, as I said, in details our core remit, as well as additional activities that we undertake, including a research services catalog. There's a link in the next slide, but we have a template for anyone who's interested to either reproduce something like this or adapt it to their own needs. This is quite important, again, mainly for communication with senior management, but also to monitor and, if you like, also to manage expectations in terms of what a team like this can do and negotiating where you put resources into. We have, as I said, so in this link here, you'll see basically all our project templates in a kind of vanilla format that can be readapted, that we use at each single level of that software development life cycle. So from concept development all the way to, say, for example, monitoring progress in a project. We have this kind of, if you like, almost a scientific notebook where we annotate progress, where we do decisions, budgets, so mix all together, but in a structured way and kind of lean, so not too heavy in terms of documentation, all the way obviously to service level agreement for projects that we maintain, and so on. Again, I'm not going to say too much about the operational overheads around running a lab like this, even if it's quite small, but I think very important to, our funding director, as I said, really worked hard to make sure that each of us have time for our own personal development. So at the moment in our contracts, we have around 10% of our time dedicated to personal development. Obviously, it's very important also to make sure that the lab has a chance to improve itself and improve its processes. So we also dedicate quite a lot of time to that. So for example, the project templates I just mentioned are part of that effort. And then last but not least, involvement with the community. So what I'm doing here today, for example, we try to be transparent about processes, to discuss them, to critique them with the community and learn from others. Here I come to the little bit, hopefully, the meaty part of this. So what are the areas that we're trying to work on the most and to boost? Visual creativity, first of all. This means really quite different things. But we have a kind of sub-team of members in the lab that developed quite a good portfolio of digital tools to enable, enhance, and expand cultural experiences and interactions. So hopefully I'll manage to talk a little bit about an example of that. We have a theme around indigenous digital humanities, so engaging with indigenous communities and technical methods. So again, hopefully I'll say a little bit more about a project that I'm actually going to attend the workshop for in half an hour. We also have a theme around machine learning and AI, especially in terms of critical use of these methods on data sets that are relevant for the arts and humanities. And then an aspirational theme around data visualization. We really like to do more in this area. With 2 designers only, it's not always easy to develop, if you like, a portfolio for this work outside our normal project work. So the project examples that I had are these 3. So one around data visualization and machine learning methods. Let me see if I'm able to share. Hopefully you still see my screen. This is a collaboration with the British Library, Alan Turing Institute, or the universities and colleagues, where basically the researchers were interested in using crowdsourced annotated material of a collection of newspapers, quite big collections, and they wanted to both make use of RSE expertise to produce code that would analyze this annotated material in such a way that was reproducible for other crowdsourced collections. So our role partially was to do exactly that, so to analyze this material and produce a set of code that could be documented and reproduced by others. So we did that, but also more specifically analyze for historians the language around accidents involving machines and also the language around mechanization. So the outputs of this project are 3 notebooks. The visualizations that you see here are particularly from an observable notebook. The code that is used is mainly written in Python. The lab is very much a Python shop in that sense. And we adopted obviously a set of libraries to operate different things. For example, I don't know, agreement around the annotation, how is that calculated, is documented in the notebook, and dynamically you can change some of the parameters in the notebook to analyze out certain words. In this particular case, you'll see at the top the words that have been selected are trolley, car, coach, and bike. And now the meaning around these words changed, obviously from manual to engine propelled, if you like, type of objects. The other example I had is for the Digital Creativity Project, and it's called GLOW3, Global Leadership of Women in Web3. In this case, it's quite a different space. So there is a blog post on our website that explains a bit more what this is about, but you'll see that experiments in generative artificial intelligence, augmented and extended reality, physical 3D printed, digital 3D modeling, volumetric light design, spatial sound, these were all kind of sets of technologies that were some of our team members experimented with to support the work of artists as part of this project. So very different space, but very relevant in our disciplines, especially with respect to collaboration also with professionals in the creative sectors. And so for that project was also quite challenging to change a little bit the way we think around our software development lifecycle. And then last but not least, the project I mentioned around Indigenous Digital Humanities, iReal. So in this case, we're working with colleagues at University of Glasgow, University of Technology, Sydney, and other partners to develop an inclusive requirements elicitation framework, which is obviously based on RFP practices, but at the same time takes into account the challenges of using AI methods in libraries that work with collections that are owned and relevant for Indigenous communities. Obviously, particular ones in this case. There's not a lot of information on the website, but I think it's interesting because in a way this is more process-oriented. So we're trying to reshape a little bit some of the RFP practices in this context that are ethically complex. But at the same time, we're trying to do that with examples. So the workshop we have today, we're using a set of data sets from Aboriginal schools and trying to analyze those and bring about to the foreground the benefits, the pitfalls, and hopefully define requirements in a different way, also using methodologies that come from Indigenous community and integrate them into RSE ways of working. Talk too much. I just wanted to say, I didn't say a lot about our infrastructure and systems. There is a forthcoming paper that discussed a little bit how we choose technologies within the lab, the open source ethos, and the critical way of choosing technologies that is obviously both aligned with research questions and research context, but also bearing in mind, for example, sustainability and other criteria that are relevant for working in an RSE environment. I wanted to point to these two links. One is a page that explains our approach to archiving and sustainability, because as I said, the lab builds on a set, if you like, a history, even if recent, a history of working in this space. And so we inherited a lot of projects that weren't funded and we needed to sustain somehow. So now that awareness is built into our cycles for new projects as well. And in particular, our technical strategy has now moved towards a static first development approach. So again, if you're interested, especially if you work in the web development environment, it might be interesting to have a look at that and to see how our team really argues for that approach and the value of being modular and at the same time building in archiving first from the start. So why I think RSE roles are important in the arts humanities, it's very much kind of related to why RSE are important in general. But in the arts humanities, we have to make the case even more because it's an area that has been disinvested on for a long time. Obviously, because RSE bring in robust processes, for example, around software development lifecycle and practices that enable high quality research. Because the design and use of digital technologies rely on experts, but also creative and responsible and critical approaches to the use of technology that enable quality, but also with an eye towards sustainability. And then I hope I'm not shocking anyone by saying the software is culture. So this is why I think these roles also do belong in the spaces that think about cultural phenomena in a research mindset. So digital research technology professionals, which include RSEs, but is also, if you like, that umbrella is wider than that. And now it's a term that in the UK is used a lot, are the best resource we have to think and to know with digital machines in a responsible manner, but also more widely. And I hope some of the project I mentioned kind of showcase that in a very high level way. They're also the best resource we have to inform not only research, but also public debate around these things. And I'm going to end it there. I realize I went a little bit over time. Thank you, and happy to take any questions also outside this venue if it's not feasible to do it now.
Thank you so much, Arianna. Do we have anyone who wanted to ask her any questions? And James, you may be excluded from this. You might be excluded from this one. Anyone who's not James and hasn't worked with Arianna for a while. Did anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I can lead off with one, and we'll probably have one more after this one. So, Arianna, wanted to ask, what's the biggest challenge that you face when someone might reach out to you and say, hey, we were thinking we have this sort of project, or we've got this big project, or even worst case scenario, we've already started this project, we've already got these funds, and we realize we need extra help, but we may not have budgeted for. What kind of challenges do you face when you're having that first meeting with someone that may not have a good idea of some of the background that you've showed today?
Yes, that's really definitely one of the core challenges, I think, working within this space, partially because people are not aware that these expertise actually shapes their research. So it's not only about helping and supporting and enabling, but it is indeed working together to identify methods that will change the research. So I think that's the first step that I try and we try as a team to convey. So the fact that it's not just about, oh, you need a solution to a problem, we'll find that solution, but rather, oh, is this really your problem? Let's discuss it again. Let's dig into that. And it's only unfortunately or fortunately once partners really engage with us in a proactive, in an active manner, that understanding becomes then part of the relationship, right? So it needs to be built with time. And unfortunately, as you said, more often than not, people come with us already with either funding or already with an idea and a deadline that is the week after. One way we mitigate this problem is to include in our estimate and in our requirements scoping time. So we always say, rather than say, for example, we're going to deliver X, Y, Z, we're going to say, okay, part of the project would actually be about scoping together these requirements, or do together user research and so on. So we try now to build in those, what we call default requirements, in all of our estimates. And then second thing, obviously, when the funding is very, very limited and the expectations are much bigger, our job is really, unfortunately, to reduce and to clarify that we can only do what is feasible. So again, one way to mitigate that is really to conceptualize the work as experimental. So rather than say, oh, we will deliver this new fantastic resource for these researchers to do X, Y, Z with this corpus, we say, well, we will experiment with some of these technologies, some of which we already know, in an iterative way. We will document that, and we will build on that in the next research phase, which, I mean, again, in experimental settings, this is much more common. But for disciplines that might be less attuned to work with empirical methods, it's really a cultural shift sometimes. And I think RSC have that role of educate as well. I hope that answers a bit your question.
Yes, thank you. That's fantastic. Does anyone have any questions for Arianna? Yes, Philip.
Thanks. Thank you for the talk. I want to go back to something that I can't remember how you described it, but you kind of said something explicitly about sort of skipping over this fairly quickly. You talked about the sort of overheads. So I'm referring to a piece of paper here. 10% of time for personal development, lab improvement, community involvement, and so on. So I'm interested in what the overall overhead is on the lab, how much time on those sorts of things. And when you're kind of engaging with people who have grant money and so on, how is that accounted for in costings for those people?
Yes, thank you. I do realize that I skipped very quickly across several things. So first of all, the 10%, I should clarify, is for personal development only. So in theory, and part of the job as director is also to make sure people do have that time. But in theory, each member of the team should have roughly half a day a week. Obviously, you can cluster it together and take, for example, a few days or a whole day every week. I mean, and then have a few weeks where you don't do any of that. But the idea is that time is to really experiment with anything you like, outside any project constraints, outside any really deliverable, right? It's just research time, but for RSE, so it usually tends to be quite practical. And in some cases, I think in some of the success stories, some of this 10% time can then inform, for example, a new funding application, a new project idea, and it did happen in the past. But equally, I think it's successful also if this is just failures, and someone experiments with some techniques or technology or methods and realizes, oh, actually, this is a dead end, or at the moment, these areas of technological development is not really matching either the criteria in terms of sustainability, robustness, or other aspects that might not make it viable. But at least someone experimented with it and can share it with the team. Lab development and communities time, those are, if you like, I did mention that we have this kind of target every year of 50% cost recovery. So that tells you that roughly this 50% of our time, varying across members of the team, depending on our roles, is spent on those grant-funded projects, and then the rest is spent on other stuff. How do we account for this? Well, first of all, when we quote for our time, as I said, we try to embed in that quote also time to do research when it's needed, and most of the time this is needed. or to do scoping work, especially for projects that are more innovative and therefore more risky, where we know that time is needed. We also build in costs for sustaining or developing a sustainability plan, if anything. So at least when we cannot promise that we can maintain something for a certain period of time, at least we have the time in there to think about what to do next. But yeah, in general, I should have added the way that the time of the lab is costed. There is a method in the UK called track based way of costing. So basically your daily rate is based on how much running the lab actually costs, so includes overheads. And that is then used to calculate a daily rate that we then plug into every funding application. And this rate in our case is based mainly around contribution to research, but other labs or other teams might, for example, do more teaching or more training. So the way that this formula is calculated would vary. I hope that answers your question, but it's quite complex, the whole way, obviously, around research funding. So I'm happy, again, to touch base if I can share more about it.
Thank you. That does answer my question. I gather we've run over time, Roland.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'd just like to finish off by saying thank you very much, Arianna, for getting up to share your knowledge with us. Really, really interesting. We really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for sticking around. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much, Arianna.